The first time Emily Hayes said, "I lied to them," she felt her chest burn like fire. The lie was so small, but it had claws. She told herself it was harmless, a white blur in a glittering sea. But even then, she knew it was poison. Emily Hayes said, "They wanted perfect, so I gave them plastic smiles and staged mornings." The truth is her mornings were chaos, coffee stains, and loneliness. But followers adored the fake sunrise. She whispered to herself that it was survival, not deception. Still, the ghost of her real self whispered louder each night. Emily Hayes said, "I traded authenticity for applause, and the applause became a drug." Her manager, Daniel Ross, nodded every time she faked joy, counting profit with each pose. Her confidant, Sarah Mitchell, warned her once, but she silenced her voice. The crowd, faceless and loud, screamed with love that always felt conditional. In that first lie, Emily Hayes buried herself. The storm had already begun, and she could never go back. Emily Hayes said, "I thought the lie would vanish in the feed, swallowed by noise. But instead, it grew." She replayed it each night, like a broken record. The lie whispered to her, promising safety, yet chaining her tighter. Daniel Ross encouraged the mask, calling it strategy. Sarah Mitchell pleaded once, but her voice drowned beneath the applause. The crowd cheered louder, faceless but demanding. Emily Hayes said, "Each like became a shackle, each share a chain." Her ghost stared back at her in silence, reminding her that masks rot, and every secret eventually surfaces. Emily Hayes said, "I built a cage out of filters." Her voice cracked as she scrolled endlessly, every post looking nothing like her. Daniel Ross sent her staged captions, selling smiles. Sarah Mitchell tried to remind her of who she was before. The crowd's voice thundered with love and hate, but both sounded the same. Emily Hayes said, "They don't follow me, they follow the ghost I created." Her ghost self whispered from the screen, colder, sharper, unrecognizable. She pressed her palm against the glass, but it never warmed. Emily Hayes said, "The applause sounded like thunder but felt like knives." Her heart raced when notifications lit her phone, yet emptiness lingered after each scroll. Daniel Ross thrived on her performance, saying, "It's working." Sarah Mitchell said softly, "This isn't you." But Emily Hayes shut the door, trembling. The crowd shouted for more, louder, crueler, demanding perfection. The ghost inside her whispered, "You can't keep this up." Emily Hayes said, "And I believed both voices until they tore me in half." Emily Hayes said, "The first lie was a seed, but seeds grow roots." Every smile she posted pulled her deeper. Daniel Ross collected contracts while she collected scars. Sarah Mitchell's eyes dimmed with every warning ignored. The crowd worshipped, but only the mask. Emily Hayes said, "And the mask became heavier than my skin." The ghost laughed quietly in her ear, reminding her she was already gone. She reached for her phone again, but her hand shook because she knew the lie was now alive, and it owned her. Emily Hayes said, "When the ring light fades, silence is louder than applause." She sat in her darkened bedroom, scrolling endlessly, each notification a hollow echo. Her eyes blurred, but she refused to stop. Daniel Ross texted her polished lines, urging her to smile harder, sell brighter. Sarah Mitchell whispered over the phone, "You don't sound like you anymore." Emily Hayes swallowed that truth and posted again. The crowd cheered, faceless and relentless. Their words were love painted with acid. Emily Hayes said, "They don't know me. They know the mannequin I built." Her chest ached with loneliness, her ghost staring back from every glossy post, whispering, "You're already gone." She shut her laptop, but the glow of lies still pulsed in her head. Emily Hayes said, "I was loved by millions, but known by none." She sat at a crowded restaurant, surrounded by laughter, but feeling like a shadow. Daniel Ross smiled from across the table, sipping wine, his eyes calculating profits in every follower. Sarah Mitchell shifted uncomfortably, watching Emily Hayes pose for yet another picture. Emily's ghost whispered, "They adore her, but they never touch you." The crowd outside screamed her name, cameras flashing like lightning. Emily Hayes said, "I laughed louder for them, but each laugh cut deeper." Daniel Ross said, "This is good for business." Sarah Mitchell said softly, "Is this good for you?" But Emily Hayes only smiled tighter, choking on her silence. Emily Hayes said, "Every post was a mask I couldn't take off." In her dressing room, she adjusted sequined outfits, each sparkle cutting her skin. Daniel Ross stood behind her saying, "They'll love this look." Sarah Mitchell leaned at the doorway, her eyes heavy with worry. Emily Hayes stared into the mirror, unable to recognize herself. The ghost whispered, "You buried me under glitter." The crowd roared in the distance, waiting, demanding. Emily Hayes said, "They cheered, but not for me." Daniel Ross smirked at the contract stacked on his desk. Sarah Mitchell said, "You're fading." Emily Hayes said, "I was already gone." Her reflection cracked with every flash, every cheer, every lie. Emily Hayes said, "Loneliness is louder than fame." She sat alone on her balcony, city lights flickering below like restless stars. Daniel Ross was at some party, sealing her next contract. Sarah Mitchell texted asking if she was okay. Emily stared at the phone, typing and deleting. The ghost whispered, "They love the image, not you." The crowd online roared, trending her name, dissecting every angle of her body, every word she wrote. Emily Hayes said, "They wanted pieces of me until nothing was left." She placed the phone face down, heart racing. Silence wrapped around her like chains, and the city below felt colder than ever. Emily Hayes said, "They saw perfection, but I was breaking." She scrolled through comments, heart twisting. Half adored her, half despised her, yet both felt like poison. Daniel Ross said, "Ignore the noise, focus on the numbers." Sarah Mitchell said, "They don't know you, Emily." Emily clenched her jaw, forcing herself to post another polished smile. The ghost whispered, "Each lie erases you." The crowd cheered louder, but Emily's chest hollowed further. She closed her eyes, hearing the echo of voices, unable to distinguish applause from knives. Emily Hayes said, "And I smiled anyway, because silence was scarier than lies." The mask tightened, and she couldn't breathe. Emily Hayes said, "Every secret I kept grew teeth." She stared at her inbox, filled with brand demands, each email sharper than the last. Daniel Ross said, "Sign them all, this is gold." Sarah Mitchell warned, "They don't care if it breaks you." Emily felt her chest tighten, scrolling through smiling lies she had posted. The ghost whispered, "Your silence is killing you." The crowd demanded perfection, dissecting her every pose, craving flaws but punishing them. Emily Hayes said, "Each click became a chain, and I wore them willingly." Daniel Ross smirked, pushing contracts closer. Sarah Mitchell turned away, tired of repeating herself. Emily Hayes said, "And I smiled, because I didn't know how to stop." The mask was slipping, but she held it tighter, even as her hands bled. Emily Hayes said, "Every deal felt like selling pieces of myself." In a glossy photo shoot studio, she posed under burning lights, smile plastered. Daniel Ross whispered, "More energy, think of the money." Sarah Mitchell looked on, whispering, "She looks like a stranger." The ghost hissed, "You're fading into nothing." The crowd screamed online, flooding her with comments dissecting her outfit, her body, her worth. Emily Hayes said, "They loved the product, not the person." Her body ached as she posed again, fake laughter echoing. Daniel Ross laughed louder, counting profits. Sarah Mitchell turned away, unable to watch. Emily Hayes said, "I was nothing more than their puppet, dancing on broken strings." Emily Hayes said, "Every photo was another nail in my coffin." She scrolled through endless edits, none showing her real face. Daniel Ross said, "They want flawless, so give it to them." Sarah Mitchell muttered, "This isn't real." The ghost whispered, "They'll never love the real you now." The crowd applauded, sharing her photos like trophies. Emily Hayes pressed her temples, feeling herself unravel. Daniel Ross signed another deal, smirking at her exhaustion. Sarah Mitchell's eyes welled with tears, but she stayed silent. Emily Hayes said, "I was dissolving under the weight of my own lies." Her breath came fast, but still she smiled for the camera. The mask cracked, but she painted over it again. Emily Hayes said, "Every friend became a stranger." She sat at a party, music pulsing, people laughing, but her heart numb. Daniel Ross clinked glasses, networking, flashing charm. Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the room, watching Emily drown. The ghost whispered, "You're invisible even when they look at you." The crowd screamed her name, snapping photos, demanding a smile. Emily Hayes forced laughter, though her stomach twisted. Daniel Ross whispered, "Keep smiling. They love this." Sarah Mitchell whispered, "She's breaking." Emily Hayes said, "They celebrated me, but I wasn't even there." Her glass trembled in her hand, but she raised it anyway. The music grew louder, but her silence roared. Emily Hayes said, "Every mask demands a bigger mask." She filmed another fake morning routine, eyes hollow behind forced cheer. Daniel Ross directed her from off-camera, brighter, happier, sell the dream. Sarah Mitchell muttered, "This is destroying you." The ghost whispered, "You are a stranger to yourself." The crowd clapped digitally, praising perfection, unaware of the rot beneath. Emily Hayes said, "I built a house of lies, and I was trapped inside." Her smile faltered as the camera rolled, but she kept going. Daniel Ross smirked at the footage, already planning the next campaign. Sarah Mitchell turned away, wiping her eyes. Emily Hayes said, "I was suffocating, but I couldn't stop breathing in the lie." Emily Hayes said, "The betrayal didn't come from strangers, it came from home." She discovered leaked emails, private thoughts turned into weapons. Daniel Ross said, "It's just business, don't be so dramatic." Sarah Mitchell looked away, her silence loud. Emily scrolled through headlines that twisted her words, each line a dagger. The ghost whispered, "Someone close to you handed them the knife." The crowd erupted with rage, hashtags painting her as fraud. Emily Hayes said, "They devoured me before I could speak." Daniel Ross smirked at the chaos, already pitching new deals. Sarah Mitchell's hands shook, guilt written in her eyes. Emily Hayes said, "And in that moment, I realized my circle was my cage." Trust collapsed, leaving her bleeding in the spotlight. Emily Hayes said, "It was Sarah's voice I heard in the leak." The words pierced deeper than knives. Sarah Mitchell said, "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Daniel Ross folded his arms, watching silently, satisfied. The ghost whispered, "The one who swore loyalty opened the door." The crowd roared online, replaying every private confession, as if it were entertainment. Emily Hayes said, "My own truth was turned into theater." Sarah Mitchell wept, her tears burning with regret. Daniel Ross's smirk widened, every betrayal working in his favor. Emily Hayes said, "It wasn't strangers who unmasked me, it was the ones who said they loved me." She felt hollow, as though her bones had been sold. Emily Hayes said, "The betrayal felt orchestrated." She realized every step had been planned by Daniel Ross. Contracts written with invisible chains. Sarah Mitchell said, "I thought I was protecting you, but I only made you bleed." The ghost hissed, "You were never free." The crowd swarmed like vultures, their cheers turning into jeers. Emily Hayes said, "Every secret became their property." Daniel Ross leaned in, whispering, "They'll forget you soon, but I'll still profit." Emily's hands trembled as she clutched her phone, watching her life dissolve in headlines. Sarah Mitchell reached out, but Emily pulled away. Emily Hayes said, "I was a product, not a person, and I was breaking in front of the world." Emily Hayes said, "The truth was twisted until I couldn't recognize it." She watched clips replayed on endless loops, edited to make her the villain. Daniel Ross said, "It's publicity, don't waste it." Sarah Mitchell said softly, "I never wanted this." The ghost whispered, "They built a monster out of your shadow." The crowd screamed louder, canceling her in real time, their fury insatiable. Emily Hayes said, "They didn't just expose me, they created a version of me that never existed." Headlines screamed her downfall, paparazzi flashes burned her eyes. Daniel Ross cashed the chaos, smiling like a king. Sarah Mitchell crumbled, drowning in regret. Emily Hayes said, "I wasn't just betrayed, I was erased." Emily Hayes said, "The cruelest twist was realizing I never existed." She stared at old photos, unable to find the girl she once was. Sarah Mitchell whispered, "I miss who you used to be." Daniel Ross said, "That version doesn't sell." The ghost whispered, "You buried me, now I haunt you." The crowd raged, their adoration flipped into venom. Emily Hayes said, "The person they canceled was a ghost I built, not me." Her body shook, rage and despair colliding. Daniel Ross turned away, already on his phone. Sarah Mitchell wept silently, knowing the damage was irreversible. Emily Hayes said, "I thought I controlled the mask, but it consumed me." The silence after was louder than any applause. Emily Hayes said, "The silence after the storm was worse than the storm itself." She sat in her apartment as headlines screamed outside, her phone buzzing with venom. Daniel Ross said, "This is publicity gold, lean into it." Sarah Mitchell whispered, "You need to breathe, Emily." The ghost hissed, "They don't care if you live or die." The crowd online ripped her apart, dissecting her every lie, screaming for her downfall. Emily Hayes said, "It felt like my skin was being torn away by strangers who thought they knew me." Daniel Ross smirked at the chaos, his pockets filling. Sarah Mitchell reached for her hand, but Emily pulled back, her trust broken. Emily Hayes said, "I was drowning, but they demanded I perform while I sank." Her scream stayed trapped in her chest, louder than any applause. Emily Hayes said, "The cancellation didn't kill me, it hollowed me." She stared at endless comments, each more vicious than the last. Daniel Ross said, "Ignore them, focus on the next campaign." Sarah Mitchell cried, "She's breaking, can't you see?" The ghost whispered, "You're nothing without the mask." The crowd laughed at her collapse, sharing memes of her tears. Emily Hayes said, "They didn't want me to be real. They wanted me to bleed for their entertainment." Daniel Ross lit another cigar, grinning as if none of this touched him. Sarah Mitchell wept, her hands shaking. Emily Hayes said, "The applause was gone, and the silence felt like a grave." Her heart pounded, each beat a scream she couldn't release. Emily Hayes said, "The weight of lies crushed me more than the truth ever could." She smashed her phone against the wall, shattering glass. Daniel Ross shouted, "What have you done? That's your brand." Sarah Mitchell said, "No, that's her soul." The ghost whispered, "Now they can't reach you." The crowd outside her apartment still screamed her name, flashes bursting through windows. Emily Hayes said, "I wanted silence, but the noise crawled inside me." Daniel Ross cursed, dialing his next deal. Sarah Mitchell held Emily's arm, begging her to stop. Emily Hayes said, "I had built a kingdom of mirrors, and now I was cutting myself on the shards." Blood of truth and lie mingled in the silence. "Wait." Emily Hayes said, "Every mask I wore collapsed at once." She stood trembling in her bathroom, makeup smeared, water dripping from the sink. Daniel Ross banged on the door, shouting, "Get ready, you still owe them." Sarah Mitchell said through the door, "You don't owe them anything." The ghost whispered, "This is who you are now, broken and bare." The crowd outside roared, chanting her name like a curse. Emily Hayes said, "I wasn't a person anymore, I was a spectacle." Her tears mixed with smeared foundation, streaking like war paint. Daniel Ross kicked the door, furious. Sarah Mitchell's voice shook with desperation. Emily Hayes said, "And I broke, shattering louder than glass." Emily Hayes said, "The climax wasn't a moment, It was a collapse. She stormed into the living room, screaming into silence. Daniel Ross said, "Pull yourself together, you're wasting everything." Sarah Mitchell shouted, "Leave her alone." The ghost whispered, "This is the end of you." The crowd online raged, their chants a digital firestorm. Emily Hayes said, "I realized they didn't cancel me, they erased me." Her body shook, her breath wild, her eyes burning. Daniel Ross sneered, grabbing his briefcase. Sarah Mitchell held Emily tightly, as if she might vanish. Emily Hayes said, "I had nothing left to give, not even myself." Her scream echoed, breaking through the noise, raw and human. Unstoppable. Emily Hayes said, "The noise faded, but the silence stayed." She sat alone in her dim apartment, the glow of her phone off for the first time in years. Daniel Ross had left, chasing new stars. Sarah Mitchell lingered, sitting quietly, offering no words. The ghost whispered, "Now you hear me." The crowd had moved on, forgetting her like yesterday's news. Emily Hayes said, "I thought I would miss their voices, but I don't." Her chest rose and fell slowly, no longer trapped by likes or comments. Sarah Mitchell said, "You're still here, Emily." Tears blurred Emily's vision, but they felt cleaner, softer than before. Emily Hayes said, "I thought I wanted to be remembered, but maybe I just want to be real." The silence didn't crush her this time, it held her. Emily Hayes said, "Without the mask, I didn't know who I was." She walked barefoot across her apartment, stepping over shattered glass from broken frames. Sarah Mitchell picked up the pieces carefully, her eyes soft but filled with sorrow. Daniel Ross's absence loomed like a ghostly shadow in every corner. Emily Hayes said, "The empire is gone, but maybe that's a gift." The ghost whispered, "You buried me, but now I can breathe." Sarah Mitchell said, "The real you is still here." Emily sat on the floor, running her fingers over an old photo of herself before fame. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I want her back." The weight of her confession felt different, less like a collapse, more like a beginning. Emily Hayes said, "I was never the image they adored." She stood by the window as sunlight crept in, pale but steady. Sarah Mitchell placed a cup of coffee in her hand, a gesture of grounding. Daniel Ross' name buzzed faintly on her phone screen, but she ignored it. The ghost whispered, "You don't need them." The crowd online had already moved on to a new obsession, her name buried beneath trending scandals. Emily Hayes said, "The world forgot me, but I'm still here." Sarah Mitchell said, "And that matters more than all of them." Emily sipped slowly, feeling warmth instead of emptiness. She pressed her palm against the glass, the reflection finally familiar. Emily Hayes said, "For the first time, I don't want applause. I want breath." Emily Hayes said, "The empire fell, but I'm still alive." She walked into her bathroom, wiping away smeared makeup for the last time. Sarah Mitchell leaned on the doorway, watching quietly with a tired smile. Daniel Ross sent another email filled with offers, but Emily deleted it without opening. The ghost whispered, "You chose me. Finally." The crowd no longer cared, but Emily realized she didn't either. Emily Hayes said, "I don't need them to see me anymore." Sarah Mitchell said, "Then maybe now you'll see yourself." Emily washed her face, water splashing, tears mixing freely. She looked into the mirror, seeing cracks but no longer hating them. Emily Hayes said, "I thought collapse was the end, but maybe it's the start." Emily Hayes said, "For the first time, I don't feel hollow." She sat cross-legged on the balcony, breathing in the cool night air. Sarah Mitchell sat beside her, silent but steady, their shoulders touching. Daniel Ross was gone, his absence no longer a wound but a release. The ghost whispered, "You chose truth over the mask." The crowd had vanished, leaving behind silence that felt like freedom. Emily Hayes said, "I thought I wanted their love, but I needed my own." Sarah Mitchell smiled faintly, whispering, "You're finally free." Emily closed her eyes, the city lights below no longer mocking but comforting. Emily Hayes said, "The empire burned, but I survived the fire." And for once, her breath was steady, her heart quiet. Emily Hayes said, "The silence became my only audience." She sat alone in the dim light of dawn, scrolling through an empty inbox. The applause was gone, the insults gone, only emptiness remained. Sarah Mitchell brewed coffee in the kitchen, her quiet presence grounding. Daniel Ross had vanished completely, chasing new clients, never looking back. The ghost whispered, "This is the end of her, and the beginning of you." Emily Hayes said, "I thought their silence would kill me, but it feels like release." Sarah Mitchell said, "They can't touch you anymore." Emily's fingers hovered over her phone, tempted to post again, but she pulled back. Emily Hayes said, "For the first time, I don't owe them a thing." Her breath slowed, steady, unbroken. Emily Hayes said, "The mask is gone, but it left scars." She stood in front of the mirror, tracing faint lines of exhaustion across her face. Sarah Mitchell said softly, "You still look like you." The ghost whispered, "You finally see me." Daniel Ross appeared only in memory, his words echoing faintly like a curse. "You'll never matter without them." The crowd had moved on, already consuming their next star. Emily Hayes said, "They don't remember me, and I don't want them to." Her lips trembled into a small, fragile smile. Sarah Mitchell hugged her quietly, holding her like the real Emily. Emily Hayes said, "The ghost is no longer haunting, she's me." The silence wrapped her gently, not as punishment, but as freedom. Emily Hayes said, "The empire burned, but I didn't." She walked barefoot on her balcony at dusk, the city buzzing below without her name trending anymore. Sarah Mitchell sat cross-legged on the floor, quiet but present. The ghost whispered, "You survived the fire." Daniel Ross's smirk flashed only in her memories, fading like smoke. The crowd no longer called her name. She was a stranger to them now. Emily Hayes said, "I thought I wanted immortality, but I only wanted peace." Sarah Mitchell said, "Then let's build something real." Emily leaned against the railing, eyes closed, the night breeze lifting her hair. Emily Hayes said, "For once, I am not theirs, I am mine." The words felt final, like closing a book. Emily Hayes said, "I thought I needed their eyes, but I only needed mine." She sat on her bed, old photos spread across the sheets. Sarah Mitchell flipped through them, laughing softly at forgotten moments. The ghost whispered, "You finally let me out." Daniel Ross's voice buzzed faintly from an unread message, but she deleted it without hesitation. The crowd's memory of her was gone, replaced by new scandals, new names. Emily Hayes said, "They erased me, but they erased the mask, not me." Sarah Mitchell said, "You're still here." Emily pressed her palm against an old picture of her smiling before fame. Emily Hayes said, "That girl is gone, but maybe I can be something better." Her voice trembled, but did not break. Emily Hayes said, "And that's why you'll never see me online again." Her voice was steady, almost serene. Sarah Mitchell nodded, silent but supportive, tears glistening. The ghost whispered, "This is the final confession." Daniel Ross had already erased her number, moving on to his next star. The crowd didn't notice her departure. They had already found their new idol. Emily Hayes said, "I don't need their applause. I don't need their hate. I just need me." She turned off her phone, placed it in a drawer, and closed it with a final click. The silence that followed was irreversible. Emily Hayes said, "The mask is dead. I am free." The last light of dusk faded, leaving only quiet breath.